Wow, the numbers are rising as we speak. I can't see myself at the moment. This is the first time I've used this system, GoToWebinar, but hello, welcome to CIPR e-learning webinar headquarters, which today comes to you live from the West Country. We're in Bath, and my name is Dave Mason. I'm a crisis and media communications trainer, and I do these sessions normally in person around the country for the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. Today we are covering risk issues management and crisis comms. Thanks very much for joining. Key thing here, as with broadcasting and journalism, is to start on time, so welcome along. Numbers still rising if you're just logging in. Good to have you there. There is a questions box, so a couple of things. First of all, hopefully you can see the screen that I've shared as well. This is worth 5 CPD points. It's going to last around 30 odd minutes, maybe a bit longer for questions after, and you'll get the opportunity to ask questions in the box during or maybe after the session, so I'll stay on a little bit. One thing that's been suggested as well is if you hashtag CIPR Learn, we can deal with questions that way over Twitter. Webinars like this are available to all CIPR members, and please, obviously, there is the aspect that this is copyrighted material, so please don't share or record and send out on social or send to other people outside of the membership. So thanks for that. So that's the key information dealt with for the housekeeping bit of it. What this isn't is crisis management and obviously how to deal with a crisis from a tactical or operational point of view. What this seminar is looking at are the communications implications of crises and risk issues management. I'm going to take you through a slide deck because it will hopefully just bring you up, or at least give you some sort of sense of what can lead to a crisis and dealing with the issues as well. I understand that some of you are saying you can't hear anything. We tested this extensively, by the way, with CIPR headquarters, so hopefully some of you can, and apologies to those at the moment that can't, because at my end, we tested it and my audio was certainly on. I'm just going to have a look at my audio a minute. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, my built-in microphone here appears to be working, so that's looking at the audio level here. So apologies if you're not getting anything there. Alan Morrison, I can hear fine. Thank you, Alan. Thanks for the feedback. One thing I did do, I did some client webinars of my own yesterday, and people that were in London, in the capital, some of the bandwidth was very scratchy on their video communication links, whereas in the provinces and around, actually the bandwidth was better, and sometimes taking part in webinars was easier outside of the capital, probably just because of the amount of usage that's going on for these sorts of things at the moment. So bear with us, and apologies for that, but let's press on. So objectives of this, to identify and manage reputational risk issues before they become crises and try and work out what those are, tackle organizational cultures, what can lead to a crisis and whether that's a cultural thing internally, assess the threat to reputation of an issue or an incident. We'll even look briefly at COVID and just a couple of issues relating to things that have happened recently. Sophie, glad that you can hear me, thank you. And Laura, good to hear that you can hear us as well. Obviously, communicating in a crisis as well is about trying to defend and enhance your reputation at a time of adversity, and we've never known a time just as extreme as this, have we? Knowing what to say when things go wrong, the key point here is that even though it's a time of crisis and lots of people aren't communicating, a crisis is an opportunity to be able to be seen and heard saying the right things. I think it was Rockefeller who once said, next to doing the right thing, it's important to actually tell people that you are doing the right thing. Better understanding comparative roles of social and traditional media in an escalating crisis, and obviously understanding what channels work best, both for internal and external communication. It's not always appropriate, and I've been advising people on this, to have the CEO doing external communications necessarily if you actually have frontline people, senior people, certainly in the medical world, who might be better placed at landing key messages with the people or the public that they want to influence. Actually holding certain members of the senior executive back and escalating that can actually prove much more effective, or using some of those really senior people for such things as stakeholder relations and other types of internal communication, rather than just going straight to the top, to the CEO, because then you've got nowhere to go. So just taking a look at stages of crisis as we see them. There's the risk issues management aspect of that, of course. And actually, many of you will already have risk registers. You're probably using them right now. Organizations which have them operating on a monthly basis, where you might meet and look at your risk issues register and managing the issues on an almost green, amber, red flag basis, which I know lots of people do. Right the way through to actually having a daily or weekly one for things which can impact or potentially damage your business or organization. Into that, of course, reputation management and crisis planning and preparedness, understanding that the actual issues, the risk issues, do feed into a plan. And actually, as many of you in comms will know, that crisis planning and preparedness should form and sit side by side with your business continuity plan. The two shouldn't be separate and divorced, and there shouldn't be two departments not speaking to each other about it, as many organizations have learned just in the last 3 weeks. It's interesting that a year ago, business continuity planning was probably further down the list of executive management things to do and practice and rehearse. And in the last 3 to 4 weeks, it's been the most important thing to get underway and running and testing. But the communications aspect of that business continuity plan is utterly critical, especially when you're working remotely and in terms of your own staff, internal and external relations. That was the post arriving there, possibly, if you heard a clunk. And obviously, the ability as well with crisis planning and preparedness to make sure that you have a plan, and that you, as comms people, and this is what I say to lots of senior comms people nowadays, a bit like at Number 10 with Lee Kane to Boris Johnson, or Bernard Ingham to Margaret Thatcher, or Alistair Campbell to Tony Blair. You need to be at that top table, and whether it's via Zoom or whether you're somehow social distancing and physically meeting people, it's never more important than now that comms is absolutely there, sitting side by side with key executives when decisions are made. It's no good being the last item on the agenda and everybody turning and saying, so what's comms doing about this? It's entirely wrong thinking. It's entirely not the way to go about these days running an organization. There is a communications implication to every decision that's made. And when I talk about Number 10 and prime ministers, who have they had by their side 24/7 for the last umpteen years? It's always been a comms person, as well as senior advisors, discussing and interpreting what the comms fallout for various situations are. Moving on to the tactical, of course, once you've done your planning and you're prepared and you've thought through your reputation management, your risk issues register, then of course we're into the tactical, aren't we? And that's actually the crisis management bit, which I'm not an expert on, and the response to your crisis. And key to that then, of course, is crisis recovery, which is something that's going to be ongoing now for probably 6 to 9 months in many organizations, both public and private. So it's the tactical bit where then you realize that your crisis communications plan doesn't necessarily work with the rest of the crisis management plan or the BCP plan. And that's the bit where, as they say in the military, I've worked with military leaders and NATO and the armed forces before, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Don't worry about that. If you've tested it and you've got one, that's the main thing. It's just working out, obviously, how to adapt it and be agile with it as best as possible. So definitions of a risk issue. That's a point of conflict in an organization where one or more of its audiences expect something from you, and either you don't deliver, and as a result, there's a gap. And that's your risk issue. What the public or stakeholders or clients and customers expect from you, and somehow you don't deliver on it, and their corporate expectation is left wanting. But that doesn't always turn into a crisis. It's something that train companies and all sorts of customer-related organizations deal with every single day and deal with very well, usually with empathy, usually starting with a human connection and the emotional, which is really important because everything in business and everything is life, even down to the stock market, is driven by our emotional reaction to things. So there's no reason that public relations and of course our interactiveness with our customers shouldn't behave any differently. But when it comes to a point where that gap gets bigger and people don't feel they've been responded to in an understanding or empathetic way, that's when you can have a crisis emerge, because the incident, or the way you handle the incident, most importantly, can cause extensive damage or disruption to your business, involving many stakeholders. And then you can have all sorts of people complaining about the way you've dealt with something, right the way through to politicians, and beyond. So, crisis, risk, and reputation. All crises throw up risk issues, and sometimes it's this unfortunate virtuous circle where the risk issue has led to the crisis, and then the crisis has something of a risk issue which comes out of that, which directly relate to the reputation of the organization, and then you're battling to deal with it. You're fighting to claw that back afterwards, whereas it might have been something that you could have nipped in the bud with some good planning and some good leadership. And nothing I'm telling a lot of comms people at the moment, especially at the top table, if you can get there, if you're a head of comms, if you're a senior comms person, is be a brilliant casting director. Make sure that you've got well-trained senior executives who aren't hiding away, and they're not all looking just to the CEO for her to take the lead on this, or for your chairperson to do all the comms or all the external media. You need to be a great casting director so that you're not put in the media spotlight yourself. There's no way you should be. Your senior execs generally quite well remunerated. They should be stepping up, and you should have a choice of the empathetic ones, holding the CEO perhaps in reserve to put out certain messages at the right time, but have a range, a cast, and a range of people that you can lean on to do the media messaging internally and externally, and divide that down so that it's not all on one person, but also that leads to more resilience in the organization because more of the senior leadership team are stepping up. They're sharing the burden. They're coming from a position of expertise in their specific fields, and that way it's also not on one of them to deal with that downward pressure of the reputation and the weight of the whole reputation of the organization all on their shoulders. So be a great casting director. Many crises arise from issues that haven't been well managed, and we're seeing that. I only watched the venerable Piers Morgan this morning on Good Morning Britain saying the government response to the COVID crisis, in his words, was shambolic. He's saying that this crisis has arisen from issues that weren't well managed, and to quote Piers and Susanna this morning, those issues would have been personal protective equipment. And I'm just quoting journalists here. This is not my own view. I'm quoting what the media was saying this morning, and that is personal protective equipment. The ingredients that make these testing kits that come from global pharmaceutical companies that are now going to Germany and Europe instead of here. And the fact that enough hasn't been done in terms of training and preparing frontline NHS staff over the last 5 years. And even Dr. Hilary Jones this morning was saying that there were warnings about this given to Secretary of State in 2016 after Operation Cygnus. Look more into that if you want to see from that. So that's a classic example that we have, that I can bring you a live current example quoted in the media this morning of crises where the issues haven't been well enough managed in the view of experts like Dr. Hilary and journalists who are saying the crisis is now on the government's shoulders and they could have done more sooner. That directly relates to your industry, your sector, your business, and were you aware of risk issues that might come in the future that could befall you? And what happens, of course, is that the risk issue and the shortcoming that's perceived by the public to have not been dealt with is the thing that gets you. It's not often the crisis itself. You know, if it was perceived that this morning that the government was handling this well, of course, journalists on sofas and on TV would be saying, by and large, it's tough for them, but they're doing a pretty good job. You will be judged. Your organisation and its reputation will be judged, not necessarily on the crisis that hits you, but how you've managed it and the issues that therein occur afterwards. And those will be the things that damage you the most, will be how you got up off the floor and managed the issues that arrive from the crisis themselves. I call this the Madonna effect. Do we remember when Madonna performed at the Brit Awards 3 or 4 years ago, and she was pulled off of the stage, and everyone was going, oh my goodness, that's terrible, what a crisis in her performance. She picked herself up, got back up the stairs, and carried on performing as though nothing had happened, to the point where people were saying, well, that was such a good recovery, that was such a good crisis recovery, it must be a fix. Yeah, she must have been part of the show. It was done that well. So that's what I refer to as the Madonna effect. Two types of crisis then. The COBRA, that doesn't stand for Cabinet Office Briefing Room A. That is simply the type of snake we're talking about, and the fact that it strikes suddenly, and you are as much of a victim in your organisation as other people who are affected by this. This is the type of crisis that would be a fire, or an arson, an attack that was done on your business, or indeed a terror attack would come under this particular type. The other type of crisis is the Python. This is the one that's arisen out of issues, where your risk issues management isn't properly governed and checked regularly by you and an executive team, emergency crisis team, and of course there are many that come under this. We could argue that the current COVID crisis from a governmental point of view may fall into this category. Equally Grenfell, lots of reasons why there. But most crises you see, whether it's Volkswagen, whether it's Thomas Cook, whether it was BP and others, are all issues where the recovery has been flawed because of the risk issues management in the first place, or because people feel afraid to speak out. You don't have the whistleblowing, and you don't have the confidence to be able to go to the senior team and say, look, this is an issue, this is going to bite us if you don't do something about it. Just looking at what leads into this from a media perspective, and why these issues and crises, when they hit the public, go further. Of course, we have fewer journalists now. There are 4 or 5 times more PR people than there are journalists in the UK now, but the reality is every single person is a news gatherer, and media organisations recognise this and know this, and members of the public are doing the news gathering on behalf of what it used to be 50 years ago, when journalists used to be out with notebooks and cameras. Lots of news these days, and my final days in a newsroom only a few years ago, a lot of it was simply curating and gathering material that was being sent in, or scraping that from material that the public produce. So citizen journalists obviously have enhanced that reach, but they also might be working undercover, filming in your organisation on a warehouse floor. We've all seen it with the kinds of undercover investigations. So social media is driving the news gathering agenda. It's a barometer, and it's an early warning system, both for the media but also for you. It's something to be very aware of, and I know that you'll have many methods and tools for monitoring what's going on in social media. Democratization, of course, of the media is a big part of that. It's not all down to Rupert Murdoch anymore. It's down to 1 billion people with mobile phones. And lots of people I know that work in comms are under pressure increasingly from FOI requests, and the fact that if you're in public sector, you have to respond by a certain time. So let's just recap on how issues can develop into a crisis. Lack of planning and a lack of awareness of the risks at hand. So you have to have buy-in from your senior management team and your crisis management group that you may have set up to identify those. The lack of compliance and monitoring across the board, and that might be from the ground floor up, that might be from staff and regional offices and staff regionally who aren't feeding back on the small issues. This can often be described as the mosquitoes versus the tigers in the jungle. It's not the tigers that always get you, it's the mosquitoes that can get you, the small things that are left to fester that over time end up causing that damage once they get bigger or are ignored. Ignoring external opinions, again, referring to Good Morning Britain this morning, and sorry to mention his name one more time, but Piers Morgan was quoted this morning as saying the government ignored advice given to them by the World Health Organization and did the opposite of that advice over testing. So will that be an issue that comes back and bites them as this goes on? Only time will tell. Autocratic management. I would quote Volkswagen in the emissions scandal as being an example here of managers, leading managers who basically covered this up by saying carry on as things are. The classic thing in the NHS, as we've known for many years, is the whistleblower organisations where you have disgruntled employees who feel in some way disenfranchised, disempowered, and blow the lid on an issue that they've seen. And we see this time and time and time again. And of course, it's a huge source of case study for journalists who are doing investigations into this kind of issue. So looking out for that. The gig culture is a classic one here. Workers, casualised workforce, and an example for this might be Uber. And an Uber driver, of course, where there have been examples of, say, sexual assaults, which has then impacted on the reputation of the brand because the workers themselves weren't properly vetted or checked by the organisation. So the gig culture and casualised workforce can itself create some risk there, and of course requires some sort of vetting and monitoring and so on. And then there's the blame culture. Is there a lot of finger pointing going on organisationally across the board, whether it's middle managers or elsewhere, in ensuring that you have this culture where people don't want to take responsibility and worse, don't want to be transparent about it. So here's one slide that you can just have a quick look at there. I think Professor Dennis Smith makes a good point. So do you have a reputation management group? What is it? And is yours functioning at the moment? It's a very worthwhile thing to put together. It monitors public policy legislation as it relates to you, external and internal issues, crucially, and trends in public opinion. And that group should meet regularly once a month. You might be regularly meeting at the moment with yours. And the point of it is to understand what that impact might be. This plays firmly into the risk register and into your risk issues management, from a comms and operational point of view. It would assess with hopefully your business continuity manager being part of this group, all working together. And suddenly you have a coherent, cohesive group that can really seriously manage the reputation. By the way, often in the legal contracts of executives, it's stated that if you're a director of the company, the reputation of the management is your responsibility. So this should always include somebody who's on the board as well, because they have direct responsibility for the reputation of the organisation. You can use it to adjust strategy and plans, of course, and develop and communicate the company position and responses, both internally and externally. Kind of speaks for itself. So just going through who should be on it, drawn from disciplines and areas of the business at senior levels. I happen to know one example where the RAC, Fourth Emergency Services, picking up people when their cars are broken down, drew from their patrols in the regions who fed back into their reputation management group and said, actually, disabled people and women on their own breaking down is a risk issue for us. And if we're not prioritising those people and getting to them first, then actually that's going to be a shortcoming for us. And as a result of the reputation management group, as fed into by regional operatives, regional patrols, they changed their policy. And I believe one of the first roadside recovery organisations to prioritise women with children, women on their own, and also disabled people who've broken down. So you can see directly how, going right to the top, it can not only save you from something which is problematic, that's a risk issue, it can create an opportunity to enhance your service and improve and prioritise vulnerable people that you serve. What better way of turning your business around, especially at a time like this. The Reputation Management Group should be able to draw on external expertise when needed, so be flexible about that. And it needs decision-making power, which comes back to the point I made about having key people on there, having someone from the board, director of operations, maybe the CEO themselves would be advisable, but certainly a director of operations. What it can't be is just an opportunity to sit around and gas once a month as a talking shop around some issues, but not actually act or do anything about it. So the tipping point in crisis incubation, moving on, is where that problem or issue starts to become external and is discussed much more widely in the public domain, whether it's via Twitter or whether it's people feeding back through your website or just a run of complaints. And a watchword on this, if you're customer focused and you produce widgets or make irons, for example, for ironing shirts, which I've not done a very good job of this morning, be aware that TV programs like Watchdog, the tipping point there is 100 complaints. I know I coached an executive to appear on Watchdog live with Anne Robinson on BBC One to deal with just exactly that matter, a product recall of irons which were burning people. And he did very well. We got him through it with some aplomb. And he was empathetic and he was apologetic over the situation. But they've been dealing with trading standards up to that point. And the point at which it tipped over into being something that the BBC were interested on a national level was 100 complaints. So don't let it get to 100. Deal with them, each as they come along, and make sure that you are understanding and empathetic all the way. Perceptions become more powerful than reality, and that's just the simple fact. Perception is reality when a crisis occurs. So you mustn't ignore any single person, really. We all know that the gap left by communication is filled with misinformation, poison, drivel, as the quote goes, and often lots and lots of social postings and tweets and anger. It's hard to call that back once it's moving around you. And be ready to join that conversation as soon as possible. Did you know that there was an interesting piece of research done by the agency Weber Shandwick a couple of years ago that showed that most organizations take 21 hours to produce a piece of meaningful external communication when a crisis hits, when in fact the social media world, we're talking 7 to 12 minutes, never mind the 21 hours. Now that might be a global organization with lots and lots of people all around the world, but even so, it's very much behind the curve. And there's that quote by Northcote Parkinson, who was himself a civil servant and lived at a time way before social media did. I'm going to show you a few disaster videos now, just for a bit of fun, but you'll recognize a few things in here not to do, and then after that we'll just move on into a few other bits. I'll probably only play half this video.
You just told me it was 0.
Okay.
Is it?
La 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 la.
Is it 0 or not?
No, I'm not going to do this. If you're going to try and trap me,
I'm not trapping you. You told me that there was no. You told me that there was no mercury vapor released from an amalgam fillet. You're not doing what? Answering the questions that we told you we were going to ask you.
No, you didn't tell me to do it.
The question is, I'll try it one more time. Do you regret using very casual Trump-esque language like shut up and go away? Please don't tell me what happened. You know what happened. Do you regret using that language? That is the question.
Well, what was right is actually we came together with our allies and
You're not going to right. Okay.
This is a commercial for the movie. Make no mistake.
You don't want to talk about anything serious.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about what you want to talk about. I don't want to talk about the implications of violence. I haven't wanted. The reason I don't want to talk about it is I said everything I have to say about it. If anyone cares what I have to say about it, they can Google me and they can look for 20 years what I have to say. I haven't changed my opinion one iota.
No, but you haven't fleshed it out.
It's not my job to flesh it out.
No, it's my job to try and ask you to.
And I'm shutting your butt down.
Why did the BBC deceive the British public?
Well, the BBC did intend to deceive. The BBC hasn't deceived the public, but the
the clip that was showed yesterday was showed to the press, so it wasn't shown to the public. It's the first thing to establish.
This has appeared on BBC, sorry to interrupt, this has appeared on BBC channels, and every person who reads a British newspaper who probably watches the BBC has been deceived.
Sure, but what yesterday was an exercise to the press. It wasn't a programme that was broadcast. But to come back to your question, why did the BBC commit a deception? We didn't intend to commit a deception at all.
Well, I'm going to step in there. That was
You went out to
that's the former boss, Lord Bell, the late Lord Bell now, who during the Bell-Pottinger crisis went on Newsnight and took his mobile phone and didn't switch it off, and then showed the presenter there who was ringing him. Quite bizarre. There's more of that, but I won't have time now to show you any more. But thanks for the questions. While we were just watching that, I looked at a couple of your questions. Thank you, Nicole Perry. Great idea to pull from those who are on the ground into the reputation management group. And from Numan, hi Numan Qureshi, is there any data on how many organisations would have a dedicated crisis team or reputation management group? I don't have any on that, but I'm sure the CIPR might be able to help you further if you contact the team there. But you know, these reputation management groups exist and they work exceedingly effectively. If you don't have one, get one together sharpish. Hi to everyone who's watching around the world. I've seen someone log in that said they're in Bangladesh. So welcome to the west of England, where we're coming live to you from for this session. So funnily enough, I know it's quite a bold statement, communication is playing a vital role in fighting the virus at the moment. Simply the communication of to stay at home and to do the following things. Public relations is playing a key part in there, both in the policing, of course, and both in the nudge idea of getting us to do the right thing in self-isolating, staying away from people as we queue outside shops, and so on and so forth. And while some of those messages have in recent weeks changed, adapted, or been confused, broadly what's getting through now is, of course, that people staying away from other people is key to this working. There have been some corporate incidents and issues, of course, and I'm sure you can think of others as well as the ones I'm going to mention. But Sports Direct boss Mike Ashley, only just over a week ago here in the UK, for those of you around the world, you may not know this, but in the UK, said that his workers in a store that sells training shoes and shorts and t-shirts for running and equipment like that, leisure wear, said that his workers were key workers. After he was lambasted both in the media and the press, and people saying your staff are not key workers, even the government stepping in criticising him, he was forced to apologise for this and actually close his stores. It seemed to be a bit of a ruse by him in order to keep his stores open and to carry on trading, even though others weren't, by the suggestion that, of course, exercise was essential, and to do that you needed to go and buy training shoes and equipment. Well, most people have a pair of training shoes, so obviously it was slightly fatuous. And it was potentially damaging to his reputation. You can see a screen grab I've got here of them discussing this on News at 10, and not in a positive sense either. You know, he was roundly criticised for this and had to do a U-turn and was forced to say sorry. But he wouldn't have said sorry unless he was really forced to do so by the circumstances and the pressure of people being so against him. Only in the last week, there's been criticism from travel experts over the ease with which people can access refunds for flights that they have booked with British Airways and EasyJet here in the UK. And I was myself actually one of the people that experienced this. My flight 2 weeks ago was cancelled, and I wanted to go online, go to manage my booking, and just simply click a button and get the refund. And it was pointed out that both carriers here had removed the button in order to be able to just get an online refund. You had to call to get hold of the call centre, and in some cases airlines around the world were only giving vouchers. That's also created criticism and waves of derision from both public and analysts, aviation analysts as well, and the media. So while some of these operators have been good in other respects, they've experienced criticism because of the fact that they've removed facilities on their websites and directed everybody to phoning a call centre that you can't get hold of, that you're waiting many hours to get through to in some cases, and then maybe giving up or only getting the voucher. So that's been a recent issue for in terms of corporate issues related to COVID. I didn't want to get into the health aspects of this any deeper, but I thought I would just pick on two there to give you an example, highlighting how easily it is for some small things, keeping your store open or even clicking on a button on a website can cause reputational damage. And it was the travel expert Simon Calder who went on national television the other day to highlight these issues and to call on these airlines to do more and to do better, and to say that actually people have long memories when it comes to how they were treated by big brands, and when all of this is over, will people walk away? And that's the long-term thing here, and that's where public relations is key, because we're talking about long-term relationships here. We're not talking about marketing and a quick win or a quick spend to try and get people to buy a product. This is relationship-based stuff, and it's critical. So what to say in the event of crisis when it first breaks? Well, we call this the care message. It's steeped in empathy, it's steeped in a human face and a human voice. And where possible, have your key executives and your key spokespeople trained in a manner that they sound and appear empathetic, and that they don't safeguard the reputation of the organization first, that actually they put themselves in the shoes and in the position of the people who have lost out or are suffering here, and they always think of those people and put the customer and people suffering first. And that's key. So what do we say? Well, the first thing is the concern, the compassion. This is the empathy bit. And this is the bit where you can say sorry for human experience. That's not the same as accepting liability because you admit you've done something wrong. That's saying, we're really sorry that you've been through that. We're sorry that your train has arrived 10 minutes late, or we're sorry that you've, on the other extreme, we're really sorry that you've lost a loved one. Nobody, that must have been, awful situation to be in, and we can't imagine what that must be like, and to share that human connection with people. So that's the first thing you need to do. But it doesn't mean you're saying, we're sorry, we got it wrong, sue us. That's quite different. It's how you empathise and how you show that concern and compassion. And culturally, of course, and I'm aware that this is just now being seen in the UK across boundaries, different cultures may approach that in slightly different ways. The next thing is action, what you're doing about it. And it can be as simple as, we're looking into this, we've launched an internal inquiry. For now, in the opening moments of a major crisis, that's good enough. At least you're telling people you're doing something. It's as simple as the CEO putting his head around your door and saying, what the hell's going on? We need to look into this. So action, critical, and it comes after you show the empathy. Then the next thing is reassurance. But sometimes you do see leaders mistakenly, especially when they've got shareholders to think about, shareholder value, brand value, all the rest of it, and lots of pressure on them from the board, seeking to reassure too soon. Key thing is they mustn't do that, and they mustn't seek to reassure too soon. That reassurance must come after you've said, we're very sorry you've experienced disruption, we're looking into it straight away, this is an isolated incident, we want to reassure you that in other parts of the business, it's business as usual, and not to worry, we'll have things back up and running, and for the most part, it's all okay. So you see how that can form that order and works better in that order. The next thing is the E, which stands for engagement, which is the ongoing dialogue and the personal engagement that you have with people through your channels, through social, through internal communication with staff, and also through external media. The fact that you might, if it's serious enough, be holding a press conference later today, or a public consultation, or some breakout sessions with members of the public, obviously not right now, but maybe in the future, or that you will publish the findings of your investigation on your website or wherever, or through a regulator and so on. And it's as simple as that. Stick to that and you can't go far wrong. Let's hear it in practice. This is an example of the care messages being used, not in anger, but in empathy, by the commander of a section of policing in the UK called Action Fraud. If you've had identity or online theft, you can phone Action Fraud, and an undercover investigation by journalists showed that a lot of these cases weren't being investigated properly. Radio 4's flagship Today programme got onto this, and the lady in charge was interviewed by Grand Inquisitor John Humphreys shortly before his retirement at the end of last year. Now, he's known for really pulling people to pieces and owning the narrative and driving them in all sorts of directions. But this lady, Commander Baxter, used the CARE messaging, and here's how it sounded. You'll hear most of it. Hopefully you can hear this okay.
Commander Baxter, this sounds disgraceful.
John, it is disgraceful because the first thing I'd like to say is let me apologise to victims and the public for having witnessed this footage. I'm angry about it, and it's entirely unacceptable and will not be tolerated in any way. As soon as I was informed of this footage and of this information from Paul, I have very robustly had a number of meetings with Concentrix, our service providers, and they have commenced urgently an investigation. And currently there are a number of staff subject to that investigation, and there are a number of staff suspended. I think that is entirely appropriate.
Wouldn't it have been more appropriate to sack Concentrix?
I think the first thing is that there is a degree of due diligence to be applied in this, but what I would like to reassure you is that when I look at this contract, when I look at the work, when I look at the standards going forward, all of those things will be scrutinised. I agree with Paul. When victims of fraud phone action, when victims of fraud and economic crime phone action fraud, I expect them to be dealt with empathetically and that they are supported. Now, I think this is not endemic, and I would disagree with Paul that, I know that Paul was there, I think you were there, Paul, for 6 days, and you were on the floor for perhaps 1 day. I am told, and I'm assured this morning, that it is not endemic. However, he is right that there's one member of staff who's in a managerial role. That is not acceptable, and it will not be tolerated. I can't say that at the moment because that is a matter for Concentrix, the service provider. But what I can say is that behaviour has no place in action fraud. It falls well below the standards of policing and well below the standards of the City of London.
But the reason I say he'll be fine.
So one thing that she does is reassure. Well, she uses the CARE and she apologises. It's the first thing. She uses bridging techniques, which we do in media training all the time, but very cleverly and artfully, she reframes the conversation by taking control at the very beginning, taking the sting out of the interviewer's tale by apologising, saying what she's doing about it, and then reassuring people that this is not endemic in the organisation and that this obviously won't be tolerated. So quite a remarkable turnaround in an interview from somebody as robust and tough as John Humphreys, and that's using this technique that we've just given you. I hope that you're still with us. For those of you that are, thanks. I'm going to wrap up in just a moment. 333 attendees, amazing. Thank you so much. And I've just seen a couple of tweets about it, so thank you so much for also tweeting positively about your experience here, and I hope the content's been useful. If I may, I'll just round up in conclusion. Risk issues are clearly about policy. Your policy, national policy, even international policy on matters, especially during COVID, where we need to be seen to be following both national and international guidelines. Having longer term plans and not just thinking about the immediate thing this week in front of us and not seeing beyond our noses. You must get the executive to see beyond their nose as well. Badly handled risk issues and risk issues management can incubate crises that you haven't even seen yet, that are way down the line. And there will be some of these that occur off of the back of what we're experiencing as a nation and as a world community right now. And of course, these crises might be the sudden ones which strike, or they might be the python which creep up on you and are judged on how you handled the issues that maybe led to them in the first place. But they can be anticipated and they can be planned for. And they may even be, without taking this from a cynical approach, turn to your advantage to show that you are an organization that thinks about this, you care about customers and people, and that you can handle situations so well that it just naturally enhances your reputation by the way you've behaved in the aftermath. So seek that opportunity that arises within. Hope that's been useful. Thank you very much for your time. It's 11:45. I don't see a lot of questions on here at the moment. I'm just going to have a quick look through. Thank you. Useful refresher. Neil, is there evidence of some companies regularly being aware of the reputation risk, but deciding to press on and take a hit with negative comms as it's still outweighed by the financial reward? Very probably, and a bit of deeper research would probably show that as well. There are some organizations that, yes, will say we'll take this one on the chin, and we'll let that media pass in the sense of it's tomorrow morning's fish and chip wrapping paper. You know, the general comms that we get over the course of a month is quite good, so that might outweigh the bad. We'll let this one ride. But the danger of doing that is that when you search it, it's not like print media anymore, where it's tomorrow's fish and chip wrapping paper. When it's on social there, it's forever. And if enough people's comments have been ignored over a period of time, you can search back over social history and you can see how people have, organizations have dealt with people. So actually dealing with this stuff now in the digital world, as opposed to the old days of the print world, is important. Heading into another meeting. Okay, thank you. Online notes. Well, this will be recorded. This webinar is being recorded, and you can refer back to this if you want to. Plus, you can always DM me afterwards. You can hashtag CIPRLearn or follow me at Dave Mason TV. I think that's okay to say that if you have further questions, and then I can deal with them as any follow-ups if you've got things that occur to you or you need some further support and advice. Thank you. And the recorded webinar, you're saying where you can find it, will be on the CIPR website. Thank you, Katie, for that question. They're making this available in the same portal with CIPR Learn. So thanks very much indeed for all of you. I'm going to sign off now, but I hope to see you again when we do more of these in the future. Great to have your company today. Bye for now.